We know Australia's PM is set to announce net zero plans ahead of the historical climate summit in Glasgow in a matter of weeks. Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director of the Australia Institute, is standing by for more on this. Ebony, lovely to see you. I mean, there still is no net zero target for Glasgow yet for Australia. What exactly will Scott Morrison be considering here? Why the delay?
Well, the delay is largely due to internal divisions within the coalition, particularly elements of the Nationals Party, who are really holding the Prime Minister over a barrel here, trying to extract a price, for getting this commitment to net zero across. Really shows the weakness, I think, of the Prime Minister, but we are expecting a deal to be done. And a lot of focus is on this net zero by 2050 target, but it's really the substance of any deal that matters. Not only does it look like we're not going to get any greater ambition in our 2030 target, but it looks like there's going to be money for a new coal train for the Nationals. The Nationals want new coal-fired power stations to be left on the table. So it's really quite grim in outlook for Australia and what Scott Morrison will be able to take to Glasgow. And certainly I think it'll be of huge concern to the international community, not least our neighbours in the Pacific, who are really relying on the globe to meet this 1.5 degree target in order for their long-term survival. So there's a lot at stake, and the Morrison government just is showing no leadership here. It's extremely disappointing.
Well, in fairness to the PM, though, we do know that this is obviously a difficult decision to make because there does need to be negotiation. That is politics. And here he's got to consider the people whose lives and livelihoods rely on the fossil fuel sector. He does have to consider the way that they transition away from there. So can you do you have any sympathy, I guess, or empathy for the position that the Morrison government is in here ahead of Glasgow?
No, I don't, because he has more options open to him than just the Nationals. Certainly he could approach the Greens, the Labor Party, a number of independents who are all supportive of taking stronger climate action. And that's not to say that any of those political parties don't also understand the need to make sure that regional communities are well looked after, and that in particular coal communities have a transition that ensures their long-term survival and that people really aren't left out in the cold. But they can't pretend to care about coal mining jobs whenever the coal companies sack workers, we don't hear a peep from the coalition because it's due to market circumstances. And we do know that overall there's a big gap between the perception of how much coal contributes to Australian GDP, how many people it actually employs. It's actually a very small employer within Australia, and we're more than capable of taking care of all of those workers in the long term if we plan it properly. The problem is the Morrison government is just leaving them hanging out to dry because there's absolutely no plans in place to make any kind of transition.
Now, we know in the lead up to Glasgow, he is set to make, a large announcement here. What do you think he will announce? We know that everyone's waiting eagerly for him to make this announcement. What do you foresee him coming out? What targets?
Well, I think that's the really concerning thing. Early reports are suggesting that there's going to be no lift in ambition for Australia's 2030 target. We know the United States, the United Kingdom have all dramatically increased their 2030 target. The US, for example, is halving its emissions by 2030. Australia's still stuck around our 26% target. The Prime Minister is claiming that we're going to meet and beat that, but he's not willing to commit. It does not look like that we're going to lift that ambition at all, even though we're going to beat it by his own standards. That looks to be part of that deal with the Nationals that we're anticipating. But more concerning than that, it does look like there's going to be huge amounts of money on the table for regional Australia, not to make the transition, but as I said, to invest in things like potentially a new coal train as part of an inland rail project. Now, that is just farcical. To commit to some type of target that actually expands Australia's fossil fuel projects is going in completely the wrong direction, and it's completely antithetical to what the Paris Agreement and what the Glasgow Agreement will hopefully come forward with. So I think it's very alarming what we're hearing out of the government at the moment, but we won't know until we hear.
Now, when we look over to countries like China, they are cutting down on their fossil fuel production, but they're actually suffering a major energy crunch at the moment. Will Australia likely experience that if it transitions away from coal as well? What's put in place to sort of fill that void?
Well, partly China's facing an energy crunch because it has chosen to limit imports of coal from places like Australia. Australia has huge, enormous wealth when it comes to its energy options. If we look at just offshore wind, for example, we have enough capacity in offshore wind to power Australia's domestic energy needs many times over. Yet Angus Taylor still hasn't put in place any regulations to manage the development of offshore wind, when we've seen President Joe Biden in the United States recently announce that they're going to be leasing off offshore wind development all around the coast of the United States. So other nations are pushing ahead to make the transition is smooth. In Australia, we're actually seeing investment in the transition to renewables and no plan for phasing out fossil fuels. So it's not that we can't do it, it's that we're not planning for it. And that is the situation that's going to drive up electricity prices for domestic users. And we're going to end up being forced to do things by the government like invest in more gas when we know that gas is incredibly expensive. The price has gone up and we don't want households to have to be relying on ever increasing gas prices to be able to cook their dinner at night. That's why renewables and storage are the future, and we need to be investing heavily in those now. They're available right now. They're cheaper. They drive down the cost of electricity, whereas we know investing in fossil fuels, they break down, they take huge amounts of capacity out of the national electricity market. We've got an ageing coal-fired power fleet that's unreliable. And we're really just not investing in making this transition as smooth and as quick as possible. And it's going to be Australian households that lose out.
Ebony Bennett, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.